Hi, Rudy. Thanks for checking in with us. Here with John Keller, political analyst here at WBZ. And I want to touch base on this ruling that just came down about Jim Acosta. His hard pass was taken away after the testy press conference that we talked about last week. A judge just ruled that, at least for right now, emergency injunction, that he has to get his press pass back. What's your first analysis of the judge's ruling?
Wow, this is really some unbelievable story, and it's troubling in a number of ways. First of all, as you note, Chris, this case is going to continue. Yeah. Arguments are going to continue next week to determine whether there was a First Amendment violation here, whether Acosta's First Amendment rights were violated. The judge did rule that his Fifth Amendment rights were violated. There was no due process here. Apparently, according to the judge, the White House couldn't explain how this decision was made or really why it was made. And basically what the judge is saying, no, you can't do that. And there's a broader issue here, which is that by taking this action, this was not an isolated incident in the sense of whether it's just the president himself or the president and others in this administration. They seem to think the White House and the presidency are an extension of the Trump organization. We've seen that in the stepping over what had been previously existing boundaries about business interests and, a divestment of business interests or putting them into blind trust. They're not doing that. That's raised a lot of questions. There have been lawsuits. But here, it's almost as if the president or someone around him thought it was like being back on The Apprentice. You're fired. Get out. No, that's not how it works. The White House is the people's house. They're in there doing the people's business, and due process applies, and the judge ruled that it didn't apply here, so Acosta gets his press pass back, meaning the next press conference, if there is one in the near future, should be really interesting.
Should be one to watch, right?
Yeah.
A couple things that I thought are pretty interesting with this, John, is a lot of people immediately, both sides going back and forth, and there's been this kind of like back and forth with the media in this administration. Yeah. This is a judge who is a Trump appointee.
Right.
So you kind of see this guy who's, I think he's part of the Federalist Society, maybe. I don't know if that's the correct one.
I'm not sure about that.
So when you see someone who's kind of, would be maybe on Trump's side of things or favor the Trump administration and things, who's taking a step back approach, don't you think that's kind of what everybody needs to do right now? Take a step back, breathe a little bit, and look at the actual laws and the rules that are governing this country right now?
Well, I think, first of all, as to your point about this judge being a Trump appointee, you've seen a consistent pattern throughout this administration and previous ones of, not in every case, but in most cases, that doesn't matter.
Right.
You're on the bench. Judges take their jobs very seriously. Many political appointees also take their duties very seriously to the point where it transcends just partisan affiliation or obligation to the individual who appointed you. But I couldn't agree more about the stepping back. I think that goes for CNN and the media, too. This whole thing should not have wound up in court. It was a conflict. It was as much a personality clash as any kind of substantive clash. I don't think Acosta's hands are totally clean here. He was argumentative with the president. That's a little bit different from being persistent about the questioning. He started to lecture the president on what the facts were, and the president said, well, we have a difference of opinion here, and he persisted in that, and I think there are a lot of people in the media who didn't really appreciate that, who felt that Acosta might have overstepped a little bit. But it's the kind of thing that does happen in not just that workplace, but in any workplace. The best way to handle it would have been for, after everybody kind of caught their breath and simmered down a little, sit down, have a cup of coffee, resolve your differences, don't let it wind up in court. But it did, and I think that speaks to the toxicity of the overall atmosphere. And like I say, no one's hands are totally clean here.
Yes, and then one other thing here is, we talk about this administration, the turnover, all the chaos that seems to be going on behind closed doors, as much as they put up a front saying, no, everything's running smoothly and fine.
Right.
But the judge even pointed out they couldn't even explain who made this ruling against Acosta. That seems to be like a mess here with this decision making.
There's no question it's a mess. The volume of leaks coming out of this White House since day one, I think has been unprecedented, certainly in my memory. I'm not in the White House press room, but I follow it very closely as best I can. And that's an indication of chaos. You know, when things are running in an orderly way, when there's discipline, when there's a culture that's not totally dysfunctional, leaks will still happen, but not to this degree. So there's a problem there, and it's something that the president's got to get his hands around. There's an old saying, the fish rots from the head. I think this is a good example. All
right, we should point out that Jim Acosta came out of court, made a very brief statement just saying happy with the judge's decision, happy that his colleagues, you know, many of the other major networks stepped up and filed amicus briefs and said, let's get back to work. So what do you think? They're going to have to sit down at some point and say, this can't happen again, right?
I would think so, but I don't like the chances of that happening. Reasonable people should be part of a situation where reason prevails. That doesn't seem to be the case in Washington these days, regretfully.
All right, so we'll keep an eye on this because it's not over yet.
No, it is not.
All right, thanks, John.
Thanks, Chris.
And thanks for checking in with us.